Great.
Super excited to address to introduce Allison. So Allison McMillan is a director of engineering at GitHub. She has worn many hats, including community builder at the University of Michigan, software developer, and managing director of a national nonprofit. Allison also started a podcast about being a parent in tech called Parent Driven Development. And by the way, I've listened, and you should absolutely listen to it. It's fantastic. She's a Mozilla Tech Speaker and speaks on a variety of topics, including mentorship, working remotely, and more. When she's not coding, you can find her encouraging her son's climbing skills, making faces at her toddler daughter, or pretending she has time to bake. Allison lives in the DC area. You can follow her on social media at links that I will post in a moment, her Twitter and her website. Without further ado, Allie.
Hello. I assume you can all hear me. It is great to be here. I'm going to share my screen. Okay. Are you all seeing the slide?
Yeah, we see the screen.
You see the slide screen?
Two screens. We see you and we see your slides.
Great, perfect. Thank you. Yeah, so I am very excited to be here. Israel is one of my most favorite places to visit. So when we are allowed to travel again and when we can meet in person, I would be happy to do a talk in person for you all as well. Yeah, I've been back and forth to Israel a number of times through a number of experiences. If there are any Judeans on the call, or Tzofim, I did Young Judea's Year course. I've staffed a bunch of birthright trips, just a whole slew of different things and different experiences. So today I will be talking to you about planning for personal sparkles, a COVID-19 plan. And if you go to daydreamsandruby.com, you'll see one of the first posts is there's a link to a blog post that has sort of a worksheet for this talk. You don't have to, if you want to pull it up, you can. You don't have to, but it'll be helpful in the future if you revisit this and sort of put together a plan for yourself. So again, this is a version of a talk that I've done before with a slightly different angle. So when I became a mom, the number of available hours that I had in my day and the amount of mental energy that I could exert just diminished greatly, like by so much. And now I have these two lovely, wonderful humans who are fantastic, but have also stolen all of my time. So in the past, I've used this talk to focus on how to maximize your day when you don't have any outside available hours in order to learn more and do more. But as I reflected on this situation, a lot of the strategies that I've used for maximizing my day are also super applicable to myself in the time of COVID-19. So, right, like I have to manage expectations. I might only get one focused spurt of time or energy in a day, or even every couple of days. And I need to really use that time to my advantage. And I need to leverage that time to hopefully kick off another focused burst of energy the next day. And to be honest, if I'm not feeling it, I really need to set myself up for success and recognize that my goals don't have to be really, really big in order to be accomplishing something. So let's set ourselves up for some personal sparkles. So I work at GitHub, director of engineering. I'm leading CodeSpaces product, amongst some other things. And I do want to mention that GitHub is built in one big Rails monolith. So we use Ruby and Rails every day. So it's still very much very active. And obviously GitHub is pretty big. So I'm also on the board of Ruby Central. I'm a Mozilla Tech Speaker, and I run that podcast, Parent Driven Development, about being a parent in tech. And so I also want to caveat this by saying that I personally am a very goal-driven person, and goals that aren't great are just sort of not great. But I'm somebody who like does very honestly like thrive from making lists and setting goals and then taking steps towards those goals, even if they're baby steps. So, you know, your mileage may vary for some of the suggestions in this talk. And the other thing that I want to say is that you do not have to do everything that I'm talking about in this talk. So I'm going to talk about some things that work for me, but figure out what works for you, alter this, use this as a guideline. Don't feel like you need to do everything that's mentioned in order to be successful. Before we dive into the steps, it's really important to think about what your learning style is. So there are a variety of different learning models and methods, and the one that I'm going to talk about today is Neil Fleming's VRAC model. So the VRAC model identifies 4 ways in which an individual can learn best. So you can be a visual learner, an auditory learner, a read-write learner, or a kinesthetic or tactile learner. It builds on Walter Burke Barb's model, which just splits folks into auditory, visual, or kinesthetic. So you have a piece of paper handy, or your computers, you can just pull up a little notepad, pull it out. We're going to go through 10 questions. I'm going to go through them pretty quickly, but I will I'll tweet out the slides, or send the organizers a link to the slides afterwards if you want to go through it a little bit slower. But for each question, write down all of the letters that apply. So again, that's each question, all of the letters that apply. Okay, question 1. You're helping someone who wants to go to your airport, center of town, or train station. You would A, go with them, B, tell them directions, C, write down the directions, or D, draw or show them a map or give them a map. Question 2, a website has a video showing how to make a special graph. There's a person speaking, some lists and words describing what to do, and some diagrams. You would learn most from seeing the diagrams, listening, reading the words, watching the actions. Question 3, you're planning a vacation for a group. You want some feedback from them about the plan. So you would A, describe some of the highlights that they'll experience, B, use a map to show them the places, C, give them a copy of the itinerary, or D, phone, text, or email them. Question 4, you are going to cook something special. You're going to cook something as a special treat. You would A, cook something you know without instructions, B, ask friends for suggestions, C, look on the internet or in a cookbook for some ideas from pictures, or D, or D, use a good recipe. Question 5, group of tourists want to learn about parks or wildlife reserves in your area. You would A, talk about or arrange a talk for them, B, show them maps or pictures, C, take them to a park or wildlife reserve and walk with them, or D, give them a book or pamphlets about wildlife reserves. And remember to write down all the letters that apply. All right, 6, you are about to purchase a camera or a phone. Other than price, what most influences your decision? A, trying or testing it, B, reading the details or checking its features online, C, design and how it looks, or D, the salesperson. Question 7, remember a time when you were learning how to do something new. Avoid choosing a physical skill like riding a bike. So you learn best by watching a demonstration, listening to somebody explaining it and asking questions, diagrams, maps, and charts, so visual clues, or written instructions like a manual or book. Question 8, you have a problem with your heart. You would prefer that the doctor A, give you something to read to explain what was wrong, B, use a plastic model to show what's wrong, C, describe what's wrong, or D, show you a diagram of what's wrong. Question 9, you want to learn a new program, skill, or game on a computer. You would A, read the written instructions, B, talk with people who know about it, C, use a keyboard or just the controls, D, follow the diagrams in the book that came with it. And last question, I like websites that have A, things I can click on, shift, or try. B, interesting design and visual features. C, interesting written descriptions, lists, and explanations. Or D, audio channels where I can hear music, radio programs, or interviews. All right, so 4, I'm going to give you way less time than you actually need to do this, but that's okay. For each letter that you wrote down, you'll use this chart to write down the corresponding V, A, R, or K. So I'm going to give you like 30 seconds to get down as much as you possibly can. But again, you can revisit these slides later and really, really work on this. Usually this takes a couple minutes. Okay, I'm sure you probably did not get to the whole chart, but if you got mostly V's, then you're a visual learner. If you got mostly A's, then you're an auditory one. Mostly R's, a read-write learner. Mostly K's, then a kinesthetic learner. You might also be a mix of multiple learning types as well. And so in that case, it might just depend on like what the thing is that you're trying to learn, or you also might just have a wider set of tools available for your use. So what does this mean? Well, visual learners learn best by seeing things, visual aids, charts, graphs, diagrams, etc. Auditory learners learn best by listening. They like lectures and podcasts. Read-write learners learn by reading and then writing that information. So they take lots of notes. They might turn charts into words like bullet point lists, etc. And finally, tactile or kinesthetic learners like learning via experience. So they like to move, touch, or do in order to really have the lesson sink in. So knowing what kind of a learner you are is really important because it feeds into how to make the most of your motivated time, and can also shine a light on what might help motivate you. So when you have limited time and mental or emotional bandwidth, forcing yourself to learn something or to do something in a way that doesn't work with your style, it's just going to make it like extra hard to accomplish that task. It's going to make it extra challenging. The other thing is that you may notice that your style has changed in this time. We're all dealing with a lot more and a lot different circumstances. So it's helpful to think about you in the now and not you 6 months ago, because the way that you learn and do things might be different as we go through this time in our lives. So now that you have a better idea of your learning style, there are 6 steps to maximizing and leveraging your spurts of energy, focus, and momentum. So step 1 is to write some goals. So goals are incredibly important. They give you focus, they keep you moving towards a direction. You really can't accomplish much unless you know what you're working towards. Think really critically about goals. So in my experience, like larger goals, I usually go through 3 or 4 drafts until I find the right set of things that I'm looking to achieve. So thinking about SMART goals can be really helpful. SMART stands for specific, measurable, attainable, realistic, and time constrained. If your goals aren't these things, it might be difficult to evaluate sort of where you're at with them. So it's difficult to figure out goals, especially for software developers. You can't measure success in like lines of code or number of features you work on or tickets or stories things you ship. Your goals need to be vague, but still be smart. And so when determining a goal, think about how you might measure, like really measure your progress and determine success, and not just say like, oh, well, it will feel successful or it will feel unsuccessful. And remember, these goals, they have to be a part of your work or work goals. So, like bad goals might be to build a specific feature because you aren't always in charge of your destiny at a company, right? They could always switch which project you're working on. They could change the priorities, etc. So make sure your goal is a little bit flexible and will work no matter where you are. And make sure to develop goals within whatever time frame you're determining for yourself. So my personal style is to write goals at the beginning of every year and then revisit them quarterly. I try to make most of my goals achievable sort of within a quarter, but there are often one or two that will go longer than that. Don't write too many goals. I literally keep it to like 2 goals, maybe like one that's bigger and one that's smaller, because I am confined to my workday, and within my workday to those bursts of motivation. So I don't want to overcommit. I want something that's going to be interesting and challenging, but not that's going to feel really overwhelming. Also, right now, like for the past few slides, I've been talking about larger goals, but you might not be capable of that right now, and that's fine. And even thinking big seems like a little bit too much. So maybe your time frame is a day and not a quarter. Do what will work for you right now. Okay, so here are some examples of some not great goals. This goal, the first goal is specific and measurable, but again, like what if your company changes what team you're on, or what if they decide that like search functionality can be defined as a lot of different things depending on what those requirements are. So it's really easy to find ways that you can fail at that goal that have absolutely no bearing on you. And the second goal isn't very specific and doesn't give much direction. Those last two aren't very actionable, and they're too wide. They're not easy to accomplish because you can lose hours just like defining what they mean, and it feels really daunting and difficult to get started. So here are some better goals. They're still sort of vague, but they're able to be applied to a number of different situations, large and small, and are specific enough to just like read them and get going. So now it's your turn. So throughout this talk, I have some your turn slides. This is a place where you can sort of follow along that worksheet and jot down, take some time to brainstorm about what your goals might be. I'm going to give 30 seconds. Maybe you could just jot down a few bullet points that you can sort of revisit later. Another 10 seconds. All right, hopefully you have some ideas down that you can revisit a little bit later and really dive into. So next are action steps, right? Action steps, once you've put some hard work into thinking through goals and making sure they align with how much time you have and what you want to do, now we work on sort of what the action steps are. This step is all about identifying how you'll measure success and what you need to do in order to be successful. So I usually do this by just adding a few bullet points below each goal, outlining some of the action items. So ask yourself these questions. How will I know if I'm making progress? What are the smaller things that I need to learn or do in order to accomplish this goal? And what's my plan for breaking this goal down into smaller parts in order to accomplish them one step at a time? In the place that we're currently at, I want to mention and acknowledge that action items might be your goal, and that's okay. In more normal times, I'd suggest that goals are larger and that they're broader, and that you sort of need to tackle them bit by bit with a plan so you can celebrate the small wins. And that additionally, putting smaller action steps on a goal will help you determine if they're smart or not. It'll help you determine if it's a good goal. But right now, like even accomplishing an action step or a small win is a huge deal, and so that's okay. So taking one of our good goals from before, here are some examples of bad action steps. They're either too ambitious or too specific. You want action items to be challenging but achievable, and make sure that they're contributing to exactly what you want to learn. And for the second goal, these action steps aren't super thoughtful in accomplishing the ultimate goal of being a more go-to person for pairing and getting unstuck. So now for some good action steps. Looking at the same two goals. This first goal has two specific action steps that are bite-sized and really help towards accomplishing that larger goal. And same is true for the second one. The other thing to note about action steps is that it can be really helpful to put dates next to them. When do you want to accomplish this mini step by? Do the steps need to be put in any sort of specific order? Are they dependent on one another? It helps sort of create a mental image for like, okay, this is the big goal and this is how I'm going to accomplish it. So now your turn. I'm going to give you like 10 seconds. Jot down some action steps for some of the brainstorming goals that you wrote down. And again, as you're writing things down, if you feel like a goal isn't smart, then you can sort of cross it out and maybe brainstorm a new one. Give you 10 more seconds. All right. Step 3 is accountability. So this step is brief and really clear cut. So you want to show these goals or the things that you want to accomplish to other people. Right? You need some allies to keep you accountable and keep you motivated. Show these goals to a friend, a manager, a peer, etc., and ask if they'd be okay with you checking in with them every once in a while about it. Ask, I had an accountability buddy for a little while, and it was like every week they would say, did you go on 2 walks this week? Or, whatever that goal is, making sure that somebody's asking you about it can be really, really helpful. And make sure that you're keeping yourself accountable. Again, pick days and times that you'll check in with these peers so you don't forget to do it when things get busy. Okay, so your turn. You have 10 seconds for this. Just jot down a couple of people that you might want to share these goals with. All right, next step, incorporate these goals into your workday. Okay, so what does this look like during your actual day? If you're a professional developer, you are likely working on issues or tickets or stories. If you're not, you've probably got some sort of to-do list that you're working from, items that you're working on. So keep a close eye on which issues or topics that your team is dealing with relate to the goals of the things that you want to do. If you can, the best thing to do is to pick up or assign yourself to a story that's most related to your goal. So for example, if you want to improve on your JavaScript, let's say, at first, maybe pick up a story that has some simple JavaScript tasks. Then as you learn more, you can pick up stories that involve more complex JavaScript. At first, you might only pick up a story that involves reading and making a small change, but then as you make strides in accomplishing your goal, you might pick up a story that forces you to write more JavaScript from scratch, or even refactor something that's super complex. Maybe you can't do that, or maybe you just don't have the energy to do that right now. So if that's the case, and you can't pick up the story, then pay attention to who does pick it up. Ask if they'd be willing to pair on it. You might not have control over which tasks you can accomplish, but you can learn a lot just by pairing on it and working with somebody else on a ticket. If your team pairs a lot, then make sure that you're gradually driving more and more in order to ensure that those lessons are really sinking in. And if that still feels like a lot, you can't pick it up and you can't pair on it, then read the pull request once it's up. Regardless of whether a PR is open or closed, you can read through it. You can ask questions about the parts that you don't know or things that you don't understand. If you have a team that doesn't support questions that you're asking, then you can jot down methods or syntax, etc., that you want to understand better and look them up when you have a chance. Incorporating your goals into issues or tickets or your regular work might happen in different ways. So think about which of your goals are slightly broader in that they may touch more stories. So whereas our goal to learn more JavaScript or be better at Ruby patterns, you might need to pick up those specifically related stories. If you think about our goal related to testing, You could be learning about testing with every story that you're picking up and every task that you're accomplishing. So start a story by looking at the tests. Do they exist? What do you think of them? Compare them to the file that you're testing. Think about why each method was tested and how it was tested. Like really think through the foundation that's there. And if there aren't any tests, then great. Look at a similar file, if one exists, to see how tests were written there. If possible, test drive the story you're writing. And if your company doesn't allow for that, hopefully they'll at least allow you to add tests afterwards. And specifically call out your test files in your PR for code review. Ask for feedback that is specific to your specs in your spec file. So depending on how your team is at giving feedback, try to ask thoughtful questions so that you're more likely to get helpful answers. You might need to come up with some more concise, specific questions to get the kind of feedback that you're looking for in order to learn more. But make it small, make it as easy as possible for you to do or for somebody else to give you feedback. Step 5 is assess. So how do we know if we're even learning or doing a good job? How do we assess our goals to know if we should move on, add something new, replace a current goal, etc.? I have a running list of things I want to learn more about, which I like to look at every week. And then when I have a chance, I'll look at the list and I'll start from the top and I'll try to, read a little bit more, jot down notes in that same file, etc. I don't do it every week, but it's there, and I try to get to it every couple of weeks without being too hard on myself if this part sort of slips. This is where I also take notes about things that I've learned so that they're in a super easily searchable format and so that I can really easily see how much I've learned. You can also use retrospectives to think about yourself personally. So in addition to team retros, at the end of every week, I try to just take 20 minutes to do a personal retro. I learned this technique from a colleague. It's super simple and really to the point. I take out a piece of paper. You'll notice this on the worksheet. And I just write liked, learned, and lacked. And then I spend 20 minutes filling it out. I note the things that were great, the things that were not so great, the things that I learned. And I also don't keep this focused on work. So life is life, especially now. And sometimes my work week is affected by what's going on in the world, as I'm sure that all of ours are. And so I note down these things too, because a personal retro for me isn't just about my work self, but it's a broader retrospective on my whole self and a chance to reflect on my week as a whole. So your turn, write down liked, learned, and lacked, and I'll give you 10 seconds. But again, this is great to revisit afterwards. All right. Finally, keep a work notebook. So my work notebook is a mix of all of the things that I just mentioned. It's personal retros plus notes that I take on things that I want to learn plus things that I have learned. It really helps me see if a goal has sort of fallen to the side or if I was really able to make good progress on it. Figure out what tool works best for you. So I use OneNote. I've previously used Evernote as well. It allows me to have notes in separate notebooks with tags and whatnot. So, sometimes I'll go old school and write it down in an actual notebook. I do that less these days because it's a little harder to transfer everything into a digital searchable format. But folks use all sorts of things. So just whatever you use, find something that you look at frequently that you're actually going to use. Because if you come up with goals and action steps and then you never look at them, then it's sort of like they don't exist at all. So this is your turn. Write down, as I'm finishing the sentence, what system you might use for tracking these things. All right, and finally, we have reflect. So reflect at least every 6 months. I prefer to reflect sort of at the end and at the beginning of every quarter to determine if I need to change goals, if I need to focus more on a specific goal, or just sort of maintain my current course of action. It's really important to set a date and put it in your calendar or on your goals list that you don't forget, because again, if you have goals, but then you never look at them. I think that oftentimes we set goals and then when we're doing our performance review or some end of the year evaluation, it's like, oh yeah, those goals, I remember writing those. Huh, I wonder what I wrote down. But you know, if you're checking in with them frequently, they can be really helpful. And it's also really important to give yourself a chance to celebrate your successes. Think about what's working, what you might need to change. You know, I find that figuring out what needs to change is happening more often for me these days as my life sort of changes on a regular basis with various school schedules and different things opening and closing and whatnot. So don't forget to reward yourself also once you've reflected. For folks here who have been on parental leave, I will say that some parts of being in this COVID era, quarantine, isolation, whatnot, feel very similar. You don't see that many people. You sort of swing from, I've got this, everything is great, to there's no way I can handle 1 more minute of this. And most of all, you've never felt so busy from doing so little. I don't know how it is exactly in Israel, but around here, you know, 4-hour grocery store trips, so much mental energy that goes into takeout or delivery, just sometimes even trying to figure out what will be helpful for you or what might, you know, what might be worse or bum you out is, it's all pretty exhausting. And so these steps and tips will hopefully help take pressure off so you can maximize those bursts of motivation or the days when you're really sort of feeling in the groove, because we know that they are coming less often these days. And in addition to our other outside responsibilities, right, our minds are just split in a million different directions right now. It's hard to corral it all and still get things done. You don't need to do the same amount of work as you used to. You're working through a pandemic. And at the end of the day, if the only thing that you cross off your list is brush my teeth, then that's okay. You should still give yourself some sparkles. Thank you. And that's where you can find more about me. And I will stop sharing. All right.
Amazing. Thank you so much, Ali. So much great content in there. And I'm gonna, I think tomorrow morning, send a great email to our HR and be like, there was so much that Ali talked about that we already practiced. So just like confirmation of some stuff that I'm supposed to be doing. So we have some questions in the Q&A. I'll read them for you. First question is, what is a good way to realize if your goal meets the SMART definition? Like, how do you determine specific, etc.?
Yeah, I think in terms of SMART, there are some easy ones to start with, right? So like time bound is the, is the T, measurable. Usually measurable helps give you a good read on whether it's specific or not as well, right? I often, if there's a number on it, if there's a really easy way to say yes or no, where things become unsmart is where things become, not sort of like a SMART goal is when you look at it and you're adding action steps and you realize that like, oh, these action steps might make a difference, but there's no easy way to know like, yes, I achieved this, or no, I didn't achieve this. It's more, it's fuzzier, right? So even if you accomplish all the action steps, it still feels like you wouldn't be able to give an easy, yes, I accomplished this goal, or no, I didn't accomplish this goal. It would still be sort of based on a feeling and your gut.
Yeah. So basically, you should be able to, if it's a SMART goal, you should have like a clear yes, I achieved it, or no, I didn't achieve it.
Yeah.
Something like that. Okay. So the next question is, do you do this practice for both work goals and personal goals? And then I think that was asked before. You talked about doing it at the end of each week. So the next question is, how forgiving of yourself are you for not making a date you set during normal times and now Corona times? You mentioned, being in Corona, being a bit easier on yourself.
Yeah, definitely these days I am easier on myself. I also, we've been living in sort of Corona times for a few months now. So I think, in March, it was like, okay, this is the amount of stuff that I'll be able to accomplish. And then in April, I was like, nope, didn't really get to most of that. And as I've got two little kids, I've got a 5-year-old and a 2-year-old. So as we figured out what to do sort of with them and their schedules. And, I would say that I was more forgiving sort of April, May. And now that we're in July, I'm holding myself to it a little bit more. I also know that we're in for a bunch of chaos in late August or September as we figure out what's happening for school this year. So I will go back to being very, I'm taking all of that into consideration as I figure out what can I even accomplish? I know that in September, between the high holidays and all this back to school stuff, I will be able to accomplish near nothing. And that's fine.
Yeah. Definitely makes sense to be flexible, right? One thing I always try and remember about that is don't be harsh or don't be more critical of yourself than you would be on anyone around you. So it's so much easier said than done.
Yeah, that's a good one.
Next question is, do you have any specific tools you use for note taking?
I use OneNote, which is pretty good. I used to use Evernote, and I switched to OneNote. I've tried a bunch of different ones. I like OneNote. It just has a lot of notebooks and options and searches and segments and whatnot. So that's what I keep a lot of stuff in. I also have a personal repo that I will keep a lot of stuff in. So when I do especially goals for work or things like that, I'll actually keep those in a repo as well. That's just private to myself.
So that brings up kind of a interesting, I guess, question that I have is, working at GitHub, has all of your personal organization, does it all live now on GitHub? Is everything in your life a repo?
Not everything, but I will say that I do, when I do goal setting with folks that report to me, we have a one-on-one. I have a one-on-one repo with all of them, and it's actually great because when they have a draft of goals, they put up a PR, and we can asynchronously sort of chat about it and give feedback, etc. And then once it's ready to go, they merge it into their one-on-one repo. And again, I keep a repo for mine because it's really easy to sort of visually organize it in that way.
Yeah, that's. Now I'm looking at the chat and I'm realizing that maybe I'm the weird one who's not using repos for more of my day-to-day organization. Ben Greenberg asks, since you have all of your life to-dos in your repo, have you built GitHub Actions to manage your life?
I don't have any specific ones yet, but I will tell you that Hubbers have amazing actions to do a lot of this stuff, and so there are definitely some really, really good ones out there.
Awesome. And then the final question is not related to specifically the talk, but Ariel asks, you've been a manager at GitHub, a distributed company for a while before COVID. Do you have any helpful tips for those new to remote work?
That's a great question. Set yourself up if you can in a good working environment. So I actually think that we're seeing now a lot of folks that have been working from their couches or from their bed, all of a sudden they're your back hurts or your shoulders or whatnot. And so, working from a table or a desk is really helpful just in general, especially since we're going to be doing this for longer periods of time. And then I think the other big thing is to make sure to take breaks. I know that it's funny, but when you're on a day of video meetings, right, you don't get that sort of hall time of walking from one meeting to another. You don't get sort of the water cooler breaks, etc. You really have to create those. And I remember before all this, my husband worked mostly from an office, a little bit at home, and I I've been working remotely for 10 years now. And when I would say like, oh, I haven't had time for a walk this week or something, he'd be like, you work from home. How difficult can it be? And now that he's been working from home full time, he's like, it is so much more difficult because you're like clicking end on one meeting and clicking start on the next meeting. And yeah, there's just the, you know, the meeting expectation is that there isn't sort of passing time, etc. So yeah, I think those are probably like my major things is schedule and breaks.
Yeah, I think that like setting clear boundaries when things start, when things stop, and like exactly how you said, scheduling. And I had this, I moved apartments right in the middle of Corona. In the first apartment, there was really nowhere to work at home, which was terrible, like working from a couch. So then the second apartment, I was so happy that I had like a nice desk with a chair and everything. But the problem is it was about 4 feet away from my bed. So a lot of times it felt like I was waking up and there it was staring at me. And like I would just sit there working until, okay, I can collapse into bed, and then wake up and it's the same thing all over again.
Yeah. It's hard to like get those, you know, get those stretch breaks and that time in.
Yeah. One more question popped in from Andrew Hooker. What's the most interesting thing you've read or consumed during the COVID period?
That's a good question. I have to say, and this is like me taking myself down my own rabbit hole, but I have been reading a lot of articles about how the pandemic is affecting working mothers in particular, and just sort of like the especially in America, like the like full generational scar that we expect it to leave. I mean, I have a lot of friends that are working moms, and I see them every day either struggling or choosing to leave work, or just trying to figure out how to make it all work in true like superhero fashion, which is really only sustainable for a very, very short period of time. And so, you know, I think for better or worse, some of those articles, they're frustrating to read because it doesn't feel like there are solutions. But I do think that they're really important to read, and that they are really interesting for now, and also like thinking about honestly like the next 10 years of our lives. Because if we have a whole bunch of working moms that leave the workforce, it's just going to take that whole demographic a lot longer to rejoin, to bounce back, to re-engage, etc.
Yeah. So that's it for the Q&A. There were some more comments in the chat about this remote move to remote work. I want to say one more time, big thank you from me, from Ben and Ariel. We were super, super honored and happy to have you for our first meetup. And it's awesome to launch a Ruby meetup and have like representation from such a big Ruby company like GitHub. So if you can, whenever you get back to the office, or whatever, back to regular life, send us some cool Octocats. We'll have to think of maybe what's like a remote working Octocat that they could have, like from the house with all of his tentacles going to video meetings on all the different laptops.
Have you all seen the what is it, the Maccabee? I forget what it's called, but the Hanukkah Octocat. If you had, I wish I had it handy. But that's a good one.
Okay, so we'll next time you come back to the meetup, we're expecting some Maccabee Octocats.
Indeed. So, thanks for having me.
Thank you so much. Yeah. So I'm gonna end the presentation mode now. We'll go back to the tables. Anyone that wants to stick around, we'll keep chatting. But thank you everyone who joined. And like I said at the beginning, everything was recorded. We're gonna put it on YouTube and put it into the Facebook group and Twitter and all that. Thank you again. Bye-bye.